Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome, everybody. It's Chris Salcedo Show Worldwide, the Vida Television Network. Happy you have tuned in, making us part of your evening on the Chris Salcedo Show. Look, a lot to go over tonight and a lot of things to get in. Varied subject matter as well. So let's get started. First off, let's remind everybody out there how you can get in touch with the show. 2 ways to do this at chrissalcedo.com. Number one, we have a phone number there. You can leave a voicemail message. Keep in mind, when you do this, if you leave a voicemail message, we'll use that on the air to help pose your question or your concern, and then we'll address it. You can also leave an email there at chrissalcedo.com if you want to do things. Since when did email become old-fashioned? Well, it's one of the old-fashioned ways of corresponding, I suppose, the written word. At Chris Salcedo TX, that's instantaneous. You guys see something on the show, and our producers, as varied as they are, he said with tongue firmly planted in cheek, they will respond to you as soon as humanly possible. Again, at Chris Salcedo TX. Starting off this evening with this guy. That's Jesse Jackson, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. He is a man of the extremist left wing. He is a big-time liberal, and he was invited onto Fox Sports to talk about the National Football League. Now, if you guys need any evidence that the NFL has turned full tilt bozo left wing, there it is. There it is. This is who sports people are now turning to get commentary on the National Football League. I think it's safe to say that the NFL is now the repository for left-wing politics. Now, for those of you who want to take on a football game, sorry, the NFL is not the place for you. But listen to what Jesse Jackson had to say.
Colin Kaepernick took a stand. I'm not sure he realized he was risking his job, but it appears he has lost his job.
Skip Bayless. He didn't lose his job because he was taking a stand. As a matter of fact, he was taking a knee. But he didn't lose his job because he was taking a knee. He lost his job because he sucks. He's a terrible football player, sir. There are plenty of other guys in the National Football League right now, Mr. Bayless, who are talented, who are disrespecting the flag, disrespecting the anthem, and disrespecting the country, and disrespecting cops, who are still working. So this whole idea that Colin Kaepernick doesn't have a job because of his political stance, his extremist left-wing views, sorry, it doesn't pass the smell test, sir, but this isn't the highlight. Just Skip Bayless, kind of an idiot. He continued.
What has he meant to you as sort of the face of this movement within the National Football League?
In the same tradition of Muhammad Ali, who, when he changed his name and affirmed his religious position against the war, they took his title. He said, you can have the title, but you can't have the championship because I won that. In this Kurt Flood, you cannot sell me.
Comparing Colin Kaepernick to Kurt Flood and to Muhammad Ali, you've got to be kidding me. Colin Kaepernick isn't standing up for any religious beliefs. Colin Kaepernick isn't standing up for equality in wages and the ability for players to be on an equal footing with their owners as far as negotiation power is concerned. Kurt Flood responsible for that. Colin Kaepernick hates America. Colin Kaepernick hates the cops. That's to equate Colin Kaepernick with these other men. Well, it's an insult to these other men.
All free agencies around the world owe their wages and their benefits to Kurt Flood, who paid the price of rebelling against the system of oppression. And it is oppressive. To go from picking cotton balls to picking footballs and basketballs without freedom is not very much progress. It's just a lateral move.
Okay. I'm sorry, but how many of you out there within the sound of my voice think that playing for the National Football League is just the same as being out in the field and picking cotton? Or playing in the NBA, just the same as being out there in the field picking cotton? First off, the pay is a lot better in the NFL and the NBA. Second off, it's voluntary. You can leave anytime you want. This is just ridiculous. And we've been through this before, but it bears repeating. Jesse Jackson and these left-wingers on Fox Sports, the very idea that you have the right to destroy the product of your employer as an employee is absolutely insane and absurd. Before we continue on for the National Football League, a couple of stories I want to read you. I'm going to read them off the screen in front of me. The first one comes from the Miami Dolphins. And remember, the genesis of the Colin Kaepernick protests were that he hated the cops. He thought the cops were out there hunting black people. It's this whole Black Lives Matter nonsense. Police officers, oh, by the way, Colin Kaepernick wore those socks to an NFL game depicting our nation's police officers as pigs. Remember that? Police officers in Miami, in the area, they showed their disdain for the protests by Miami Dolphins players that they engaged in by refusing to provide security for the game against the Jets this last Sunday. A hat tip to the constabulary out there in the Miami area for having some pride, for taking a stand and saying, oh, you hate the cops, Miami Dolphins? Well, then you must hate the security we provide, so we're not going to get out there and put our safety on the line for a bunch of people who believe the worst in us, and inappropriately so, without any evidence. Another one. Survey came out on Monday from the Remington Research Group. You know what the survey showed? That Major League Baseball is now is a top sport in America on top of the National Football League. Why? Because of the anti-American protests. Just something I want you all to consider. Moving on to the next element now. That guy right there is Senator Bob Corker. Senator Bob Corker is in a bit of a back and forth with the President of the United States. And the way this was being reported by Good Morning America and by Fox is that Bob Corker was being attacked by the President. However, Bob Corker launched an attack on the President first. The President responded, and then little Bob Corker here and the basket of biased press said, oh, the President's attacking Bob Corker. Craziest thing I've ever seen, the most dishonest thing I've ever seen. But Bob Corker said something in this interview with Good Morning America that I wanted you all to pay attention to. And this is very sad, and this is becoming all too emblematic of an elitist Republican Party.
I would just like for him to leave it to the professionals for a while and see if we can do something that's constructive for our country, the region, and the world.
Did you guys hear that? He wants Donald Trump to leave it to the professionals, the professional politicians. The arrogance, the elitism. I hasten to remind Bob Corker that in America, we, the people, rule, and that most Americans find the idea of a professional political class offensive, and we should, because the founding fathers of this country never intended for politicians to make a career out of being politicians. They were supposed to get in, do their service to their country, and get out and go make a living in the private sector. You know what this reminds me of? What President Bush said the other day. Let me remind you.
America is not immune from these trends. In recent decades, public confidence in our institutions has declined. Our governing class has often been paralyzed in the face of obvious and pressing needs.
Every American within the sound of my voice should know and understand there is no such thing, at least as far as the American tradition is concerned, as the governing class. Or as Bob Corker probably thinks about it, and Senator John McCain and all these others, the ruling class. Universally, Democrats think this way. Nearly universally, the Democrats think this way. But it's very troubling for the Republican Party to be going down this road. I think they ought to be held accountable for it. And by the way, I got to add a little bit to this. Senator Bob Corker is not standing for re-election because his home state wouldn't re-elect him. Just dropping out, when was it? Tuesday? Late Tuesday. Senator Jeff Flake out of Arizona, he dropped out. Both he and Corker, milquetoast Republicans whose electorate is tired of all of their broken promises. Tired of them campaigning as conservatives and then getting to Washington, D.C. and governing as a governing class, as a bunch of elites on the lookout for other elites, even their Democrat colleagues. And Americans are rightly tired of this. It's why we elected President Donald Trump. Other issues out there. That's Peter Schweitzer of Clinton Cash, Martha McCallum at Fox News. They were going over these latest revelations, folks, that we're going to talk to in great detail in the second segment, but I wanted to introduce you to these concepts. I said in the very beginning of all of this, back in December when the Democrats started politicizing talking with the Russians, that they had better watch what they wish for. And now that these investigations are continuing, we're getting more and more revelations that it wasn't Donald Trump or Republicans who were colluding with Russians. It was indeed Democrats. And bear in mind, folks, Democrats have a long history and a long tradition of colluding with Soviets and Russians against America. But listen to this latest controversy.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. The Foreign Agents Registration Act was launched in the 1930s in the wake of Nazi attempts to influence American politics. And the law is very clear. If you're doing work for a foreign government or foreign government entity like this so-called think tank, you're required to register with the Justice Department. And
that's John Podesta's brother, the Podesta Group. If that name rings a bell with you guys, Podesta, big-time lawyer, consigliere for Hillary Clinton. Crooked as the day is long. And apparently the same thing that Paul Manafort was doing, doing work for another country and not registering with in FARA. Same thing with the Podesta Group. Democrats now ensnared with what's going on here with inside the Podesta Group. And boy, it gets even shadier than this.
They do that so that people know who you're meeting with and, who's paying you to do those activities. Based on these reports, the Podesta Group did not register with the Justice Department. That's a huge issue.
It is a huge issue. It's a felony. It's a felony. And they were doing work with Russians who were working on several things, including, well, let Peter Schweitzer tell you.
And Paul Manafort has the same issue with the same group, correct?
That's exactly right. They were both working for the same group. It's also interesting to point out the Podesta Group, this lobbying firm, also was a lobbyist for Uranium One beginning in 2012 to the tune of $180,000. So lots of interesting connections with the Podesta Group.
So, all right. And what about the $500,000 Bill Clinton speech? How does that play into this?
Yeah, and he's going to tell you here in a minute. But Bill Clinton, it came out now, he wanted to go to Russia to talk with some of the Russian folks after this Uranium One deal. For those of you who don't know what the Uranium One deal, basically America has a stockpile of uranium. 20% of that stockpile was given to the Russians, courtesy of the Obama administration and courtesy of Hillary Rodham Clinton, who was then Secretary of State. One question that has not been asked of any Democrat that I know, actually, you know what, I take that back. Tucker Carlson had a Democrat spokesperson, a hack, on his show a couple of nights ago, asked him, how did this benefit America? How does giving the Russians 20% of our uranium, control over 20% of our uranium, how does that help America? Not one Democrat has answered that. Not one Democrat has been asked that by ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN. Nobody in the basket of biased press has asked this of a Democrat. Peter Schweitzer, though, connecting some dots here.
Well, that ties into 2010 when they're trying to get the approval of Uranium One to be sold to the Russians. Bill Clinton gives a $500,000 speech in Moscow, which is basically 3 times more than he had ever been paid to give a speech in Russia before.
No, wait a minute. I know he's a former president, but I don't want to let this point go by Peter Schweitzer. Because his wife was Secretary of State. Now, Bill Clinton had given speeches in Russia before, but when she became Secretary of State, the speaking fee went up 3-fold. Now, how does that work? Why does that happen? Did Bill Clinton all of a sudden become a greater former president because Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State? Of course not. What was different is that the Russians had determined we can get something out of Clinton's comrade. And that's precisely why Bill Clinton got $500,000. His charitable foundation, which ended up being a Ponzi scheme for the Clintons. But anyway, Peter Schweitzer continued to talk a little bit more about that.
And the company that paid for that was an investment firm that, of course, was pushing Uranium One as an investment.
Yeah. So you guys get the idea of how incestuous this all is. It's as crooked as the day is long. And I've got to tell you, folks, that I'm going to play some video for you, or some audio in just a second. But Charles Lane here, he's a writer for the Washington Post. And this guy has been on, Trump collusion, Trump, Russia. He is now having to admit in the midst of, as they start to reveal more and more Democrat connections, and this whole collusion talk is being dropped by Democrats because now they're starting to realize they're being found out. Now, Charles Lane here is saying, well, maybe we're not talking about so much collusion anymore.
Again, stepping back and looking at the big picture that we're getting here, maybe collusion is receding, but there was a lot of Russian activity in America.
Oh, yeah, maybe Russia, collusion, maybe it's receding. That's another way of saying there was no there. Over a year and a half of investigation about what's going on between Russia and Trump collusion. It's non-existent. But all of a sudden, there seems to be real connections, real collusion between Democrats and the Russians. And of course, you wouldn't expect the Washington Post to care much about that.
America over the last few years. And yes, there was this purchase of the uranium stockpile, which remains to be explained. There's the penetration of lobbyists. There's the effort to, advertise on Facebook. I think everybody ought to be concerned that stuff was going on. And that has been true from the beginning.
We conservatives have been very upset about Russia. We were upset about Russia when they were invading our allies, Ukraine. We were upset when Russia invaded Georgia. We have been leery in the conservative movement of Russians throughout the entire Obama administration, when Barack Obama was talking about doing secret deals with Vladimir Putin, when he was talking to Dmitry Medvedev on that open mic moment. You know what? I'm looking at the clock right now, folks. I'm not going to have time to get you that audio. I might do it here in coming days. It's audio, so it doesn't translate very well onto television because all you'll see me here and my lips not moving. But some of the points that I brought up in there was kind of an epic rant. Last thing, Fusion GPS. These are the folks who came up with the Trump dossier. Here's what Senator Tom Cotton had to say about that.
This outfit here in Washington, D.C., Fusion GPS, has gone to the greatest lengths possible to try to conceal who paid them, which makes me think it was probably a Democratic political operative or Russian intelligence service.
He's probably right. Be right back, folks. Chris Salcedo Show worldwide on the Vida television network. All right, welcome back, everybody. It's Chris Salcedo Show worldwide here on the Vida television network. Earlier today on the radio show, I had the opportunity to speak to one of our legal eagles here on the Chris Salcedo Show. His name is Byron Henry, works at a law firm in Dallas, Texas. And I wanted to talk to him from a legal perspective about some of the jeopardy Democrats are increasingly finding themselves in over what we talked about in the first segment. All of these revelations that it wasn't Trump, wasn't Republicans doing deals with Russians. It was actually Democrats. Here's how that conversation went. Welcome back, everybody. It's Chris Salcedo Show. I am glad to have you on board here. This is your Radio Republic, folks. Unlike your current federal government, your views are heard, listened to, and addressed right here on this program. Want to talk about some of these issues, an increasing link being found between the Russians and the Democrats. No collusion between Trump and the Russians, but Russia and the Democrats. Here to help me sort through all of these stories, Byron Henry. He's an appellate law expert with the law firm Sheaf and Stone, LLP, in Dallas, Texas. Mr. Henry, welcome back to the Chris Salcedo Show.
Great to be with you, Chris.
All right. Last week, bombshell report out of the Hill that there was an investigation by the FBI into bribery while the whole Uranium One deal was going on. And for the folks that don't know what the Uranium One deal was all about, this is where Team Obama and Team Hillary basically gave away 20% of America's fissile material to make nuclear weapons and generate nuclear power to the now hated Russians. The fact that there was an FBI case that we didn't know about, Byron, what does this say to you?
Well, there's a couple prongs on this, Chris, to think about. There's really three prongs to this. One is the Podesta Group, the fact that they were lobbying for a foreign government on this deal. They hadn't disclosed it, which, of course, is a felony if it's proven. Then you've got the Clinton angle where it was given away. I put that in quote marks. You can't see it on the radio, but given away in return for basically a contemporaneous donation to the Clinton Foundation of $145 million. So we can't forget that generous contribution. So to the extent it was given away, it was awfully expensive. And thirdly, it's the Obama administration angle. When President Obama's State Department approved this transaction, they knew that there was an active, massive espionage action being directed both at the Clintons and in government with respect to this deal and other aspects of our government by the Russians. So at the time this was known, it was rubber stamped by the Obama administration, which is very concerning. And as you said earlier, special prosecutors, their job is not to investigate, it's to prosecute. Not a special investigator. You have to have a crime to prosecute, and they inevitably find crimes. And a while back, I was on your show and a few other shows with interviews, and just a stray remark I made early in the Russian, when Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer were making comments like, let's don't jump to conclusions. There's a lot of smoke here, but we need to get to governing. I was thinking, are they actually being reasonable about this Russian collusion thing? Are they actually saying there's nothing here early on? And it comes to find out, maybe they weren't being reasonable. Maybe they knew, being senior Democrats, that there was some issues with the administration of the Democrats and the Russians, that they really didn't want to pull that thread and unwind what a special prosecutor would find out in its investigation.
You know what? I'm right there with you. And I just said, before we brought you on, I said pretty much the same thing. Like Harvey Weinstein was the worst kept secret in Hollywood, that he was a reprobate, but Hollywood protected him because he gave a lot of money to Democrats. He was a big money guy, and he was your ticket to fame. The same way the Democrats protected Team Obama and Hillary Clinton. As a matter of fact, Obama knew how crooked the Clintons were, because Obama made a condition that he didn't want their exploits to taint his administration. So he made her sign an agreement that the Clinton Foundation would be separate from anything that the Obama administration was doing, because he didn't want the corruption in there, or at least he didn't want to be caught. And he knew that the Clintons were sloppy and they believed they were owed this stuff, and he didn't want it rubbing off on their administration. It seems it's the worst kept secret among Democrat circles that Obama and Clinton were crooked.
Certainly, and I always found it odd. I know that there's a rivalry there, but when administrations rotate to the next administration, goes Republican to Democrat, the first people to look for are the former occupants of the White House. It's kind of an incestuous type deal. But when President Bush became president, he tapped Andy Card, a former cabinet member under his father, to come back into the administration. So you always have a few new people, maybe your chief of staff is new, and then you have a lot of other people that kind of, quote, know what they're doing and have been in Washington. I always found it odd that President Obama did not tap the vast political knowledge of a lot of the Clinton cronies, as I like to call them, who were smart people, whether you agree with them on a policy or a political, to help him run the White House and to help him run the government, since Bill Clinton was the most recent president of 8 years and had control of the executive branch for 8 years, and President Obama didn't tap that. And it just goes back to the rivalry I think we've heard in the news and whatnot. It may not just be a rivalry. It may be that President Obama knew that the Clintons could be poisoned for his presidency, especially scandal.
Well, yeah, and poison in more ways than one. You know what happens to folks who try to dish on the Clintons. Byron Henry, folks, he's an appellate law expert with the law firm Sheaf & Stone, LLP, in Dallas, Texas, part of the Legal Eagle team here on the Chris Salcedo Show. You mentioned this earlier in the interview, and I want to circle back around. Another revelation, odd being reported by NBC News, that's out there about Robert Mueller now looking into the Podesta Group. Now, Paul Manafort is under the gun right now and under investigation because he didn't declare that he was working for a foreign government. And it turns out neither did the Podesta Group. They were working with Russians.
Exactly. And this is where I think this unwinding of the thread is going to prove very important. I believe, based on some reports and some, of course, I don't have any personal knowledge, but based on the reports I've read and putting things together, that Manafort may be in some trouble. Mm-hmm. We know they're working, and investigating because of these activities without declaring himself a foreign agent and some of the things he's up to. But it looks to me like there's a pretty strong case that the Podesta Group was directly lobbying a foreign government, wasn't registered. It's a felony, and the connections to John Podesta, we all know about the emails that came out in the DNC emails with respect to John Podesta. People don't understand, or if they don't, they should read and understand the importance of John Podesta and his circle to the Clintons. John Podesta is central, a key figure in both strategy and business dealings and politics for the Clintons. So if there's a connection to John Podesta and you start getting into emails and conversations with the Podesta Group, which is his brother, by the way, then there could be a treasure trove of both embarrassing and criminal information come out with respect to the Clintons, including, and it may not even have anything to do with the uranium. That's the thing I always thought would happen, is they'd start investigating something, looking into the DNC email hack, and they'd start seeing all these emails, and they'd find evidence of some corruption or a crime that didn't have anything to do with Russia. It's just, backdoor corruption and dealing, like the questions that got passed by Donna Brazile in the CNN debate thing. Things like that would basically be very embarrassing. But it looks like it may go further than that and actually be criminal. So I think if you want to keep your eye on the ball, keep your eye on the name Podesta with respect to the Clintons,
sure.
And that is where you're going to find the connections.
Yeah, I got about 30 seconds left, and I want you to touch briefly on Fusion GPS. Democrats are very leery about what they have to say. Fusion GPS refuses Congress asking them where they got their money from to put out that fake, discredited Trump dossier. How long can they hold out and not divulge who's paying them, whether it be, many are speculating, like Senator Tom Cotton, it could be the Democrats, could be the Russians.
They can hold out as long as the court processes take. So Congress obviously has the right to compel that information if there's anything that's privileged. First Amendment, it's not journalistic privilege, it's not free press. So basically, as long as it takes the process to play out, they can hold out. But eventually they are going to have to disclose that information by court order or be held in contempt of court or by Congress. So we will find out who ordered this hit piece and paid for this hit piece on President Trump.
Yeah, and the hit piece, which has been the predicate of the entire Mueller investigation. Byron Henry, everybody, appellate law expert with the law firm Sheaf & Stone, LLP in Dallas, Texas. Sir, always appreciate the time on the Chris Salcedo Show.
My pleasure.
Okay, kids, that's going to do it for the Chris Salcedo Show worldwide here on the Vida Television Network. You want to get in touch with the show about anything you've seen here, questions, comments, concerns, anything you have, go right there, chrissalcedo.com, ChrisSalcedo.com. Not only can you leave a voicemail there, you can also just do it the old-fashioned way. Or actually, which one's more old-fashioned? Is it the email or is it the phone message? Either way, just get in touch with the Salcedo Show, or you can get instantaneous feedback on Twitter at Chris Salcedo TX, at ChrisSalcedotX, as in Texas. Have yourselves a great evening. Back here tomorrow night for the Chris Salcedo Show worldwide on the Vida Television Network.